Gresham College presents Contemporary Christian Art by the Right Reverend Lord Harries of Pentregarth.
So this lecture, the last of this series of lectures, is concerned with artists who are still alive, but it's concerned only with those whose work relates fairly directly to Christian iconography. This means that I'm not considering a number of artists who perhaps do have a strong spiritual dimension to their work and whose work sometimes has recognizable visual resonances with Christian themes. For example, I'm not dealing with people like Anselm Kiefer, whose work, despite focusing on the destruction of Germany, has something of a mystical feel to it, nor with Anthony Gormley, whose work has been shown in cathedrals, and Mark Wallinger, whose work, like that of Gormley's, might be categorized as the expression of a spiritual humanism. I think of people like Bill Viola, whose work, like that of Damien Hirst and Chris O'Feely, sometimes does make quite specific verbal or visual reference to particular themes. Some of this work I much admire, but I can't discuss it here. I will be considering 14 artists, some well-known, mostly not so well-known, who focus more specifically on Christian themes. Fenwick Lawson, born in 1923. This is his Pieta. He was born and brought up in County Durham, studied at the Royal College of Art and was influenced by Epstein. He was head of sculpture at Newcastle-on-Tyne College of Art, later the Polytechnic, where he also became the principal. And more than 50 works of his have been commissioned, almost all in the northeast, with the great majority of them in churches. You may perhaps think that his work reflects something of the German expressionist tradition, for example, that of a person like Ernst Barlach, who worked in wood and whose work was destroyed by Hitler. This is his risen, ascended Christ. This is the body of St. Cuthbert being carried by monks. And that is the head of Cuthbert. The next artist I'd like you to look at is Peter Ball, born in 1943. This is another Pieta, which is in Winchester Cathedral. Peter Ball was born and brought up in Coventry and was very much influenced by his teachers at his local school. He trained at Coventry School of Art and has worked full-time as a sculptor from 1968. His secular work has often been described as witty, and he usually begins in his secular work, as in his religious commissions, with a piece of driftwood. He must be the most commissioned of all contemporary artists, with over 60 commissions from churches or cathedrals. And this popularity is no doubt related to the fact that he has said that a work in a church setting, quotes, has to be a devotional object, not an architectural set piece. This is his Virgin and Child. And this is his Christ from the Flames in Cotgrave, 1998. Now, the first word that comes to mind on seeing one of these religious commissions of Peter Ball's is, of course, Romanesque. Pamela Tudor Craig, after describing the driftwood and copper plate materials of his work, says, "So his Christus has, in the nature of its composition, the battle-scarred endurance of a time-worn Romanesque Christus." But she continues, "The large-eyed, narrow-bearded heads of Romanesque art come naturally to Peter Ball. He is not the heir of the comely Gothic, but of the tormented prophets of Siac, or even further back of Celtic spirit figures. His way of seeing is most suited perhaps to commissions for the hanging rood or for a gaunt Pieta, but there is a tenderness in his treatment of the Nativity, and in his Madonnas he can suggest something of the mystery that hedges about, for example, the Holy Virgin of Rocamadour. But this sculpture," she says, "is no way a pasticheur of the age of faith. He's none of the subservience that would imply. His visual quotations are made with panache." And this is his crucifix in Winchester Cathedral. And this is his Christus Lect from Southwell Minster, 1987. And this is something a little bit different. Hope, St. Martha the Housewife from Broxtowe, Nottingham, 1997. Now, another very different artist, Anthony Caro, one of our best-known modern artists, born in 1924, a little older than the other ones we're considering. This is his Descent from the Cross, number 1, after Rubens, 1987-8. Anthony, now Sir Anthony Caro, Order of Merit, originally read engineering at Cambridge, but after war service studied art at the Regent Street Polytechnic and the Slade and worked under Henry Moore. However, he soon left aside figurative sculpture to produce his characteristic sculptures made from found pieces of industrial waste. And from 1987 to 1990, he worked on large sculptures stimulated by Rembrandt's Descent from the Cross in the Altarpiece in Munich. And this is a Descent from the Cross too, but this is the one after Rembrandt, 1988-9. This, his sculpture of the Last Judgment, 1995-9. This was presented at the Venice Biennale and was Caro's response to the atrocities of World War II. You can't see very much of that, so I'm not going to linger long on it. And I'm not going to linger long on this one, but I need to show this. This is the Chapel of Light of St. Jean-Baptiste Bourbourg in France. There you see it as a ruined church, ruined as a result of World War II, some 20 miles from Calais. Now, the French director of the Arts Council for Northern France had seen Caro's 25-piece sculpture on the Last Judgment at the Venice Biennale, the one I've just shown, and wanted him to produce something in the then blocked-up chancel area. Caro was amazed that when he saw this ruin together with the director, he was given complete freedom to do what he wanted. And this is the chancel of the cathedral, or the church rather, when it had been done. You can see with his sculptures round at the bottom. And this is a close-up of some of them, the waterfall. As it was to be a baptistry, a priest suggested the theme of water, and this is what he's produced, associating also it with the theme of creation. Jewish by background, Caro doesn't like the connotation of the word religious to describe his view. However, he has said that despite everything, life is wonderful, and he wanted to convey a celebratory mood. There is some representative work in this sculpture on animals to help do this. But he loved the space and light of the building, and he wanted, above all, the work to help create a spiritual space for people, whatever their beliefs. The work took some 8 years to come to fruition and posed both the major challenge and a consummation of Caro's highly distinguished career. There's another one, close-up of the waterfall. And this is the last of his slides, something slightly more traditional. This is all part of the same church. This is called Oak Towers Melody and Harmony, where obviously people could speak from, read from, preach from. Now, some of you will have seen this east window in St. Martin's in the Field, done in 2007 by Shiradze Hushiari. Caro's religious work is not purely abstract. At the least, it hints at the representational, as have nearly all the artists we've considered in previous lectures. This is for fundamental reasons, because Christianity is committed to the fact that the divine word became flesh, the invisible was made manifest. But even more abstract work can work in some context, as we saw in the case of the Kerry Richards Sacrament Chapel in Liverpool's Roman Catholic Cathedral a few lectures ago. Now, amongst contemporary work in this genre, I single out Sherazeh Hushiari, who was born in Shiraz, but has lived and worked in the UK since 1976. She trained at the Chelsea College of Art and has worked in many major collections around the world. Her work draws on Sufi spirituality, particularly Persian mysticism. And here is that same east window at night. And those of you who've been into St. Martin's will know that although it seems simple, it's strangely effective. This is work by Alison Watt in 1965, which was commissioned for Old St. Paul's Church in Edinburgh. It's called Still, in 2004. Alison Watt trained at Glasgow School of Art and has been the youngest artist ever to have had a solo exhibition both at the Scottish National Gallery and the National Gallery in London, where she was artist in residence from 2006 to 2008. She began as a figurative, in particular a portrait painter, but her work is now associated with studies of fabric. As has been written, these exquisite canvases edge towards the abstract, yet had a strange quality which suggested human presence, or at least absence. And still, this piece for Old St. Paul's in Edinburgh was awarded the 2005 ACE, that is Art and Christian Inquiry Award, for commissioned artwork in ecclesiastical space. This is work by Sophie Hacker, 9 panels in response to Messiaen's La Nativité du Seigneur. These works, each 60 centimetres square, were produced in response to Messiaen's work. Sophie Hacker listened to the work many times in a variety of recordings and over a year produced 9 works of art related to the life and especially the Nativity of Christ. The works are low-relief sculpture made mainly out of slats of wood, lead, wire, and all manner of found objects rather than stone. Sophie Hacker has a great love of these objets trouvés, as they're called, and their possibilities as art. This is the one, the worship of the shepherds. This, for example, is based on the work of the shepherds. It includes flattened bark, handmade paper, hessian of different kinds, string, and old leather. This has 5 thick strands of materials that are diagonal across the work with their roots in the earth against the background of a rising sun. Although Sophie Hacker sees herself as a sculptor, she trained at the Slade as an abstract painter, and I think that one of the strengths of these works is the unity and interplay between the objects and the way they've been painted. Using acrylic, there's a powerful use of colour, which helps to give each work both its unity and its distinctiveness. Some of the works are very accessible. For example, this one in the series, Les Anges, the Angels, with its swirling shapes in different blues. As has been written, soft textures evoke the surface of feathers, shards of mirror reflect light over the image as the main shape sweeps up like a swarm of starlings. Metallic leaf and iridescence bring out even more glimmer. All this articulates the chattering high notes of the music. There's another one from the same series, The Worship of the Magi. And another one, God Among Us. And the last one of her work from that work, Jesus' Acceptance of Suffering. Requiring more attention before it makes its impact is this work on Jesus' acceptance of his suffering. Dominating the piece, as you can see, is a rough piece of wood of interesting texture with subtle shapes in it, which emerges from a metallic background of brown with glints of gold. This is now something very different. Again, Francis Highland, born in 1930, his Nativity Polyptych, 1961, in Oxford Brookes University. Francis Highland was born in Birmingham and educated at Camberwell and the Slade. He continues to teach and write as well as paint. He's always painted religious images in addition to his other work, and he became a Roman Catholic in 1979. From what he has written of himself and his relation to his painting, he's clearly a devout one. And for the last 30 years, he's been working on a 91-picture series on the life of Christ. This doesn't seem to be public accessible at the moment, but I suspect it will be his best work. That's a work he did in 1956, the Crucifixion for the Arts Council. And another artist, Jean Lamb, Mother and Child. Jean Lamb works part-time as an artist and part-time as a Church of England deacon in Nottingham. She writes that she turned away from the church when young, but rediscovered Christ in the womb of creation. With the birth of her second child, she discovered Christ there and offered him back to God. And this is obviously reflected in the image you're seeing, which clearly also has echoes of Mary and the Christ child. And this is her crucifixion. Ian McKillop, this is his Pieta from Gloucester Cathedral Altarpiece in 2003. McKillop studied history of art at Manchester University and fine art at Kingston University. He's taught for most of his life, as well as being a prolific painter of Christian themes, particularly the Passion. He now combines painting with ordained ministry in the Church of England, and he's received commissions from a number of churches, including Gloucester Cathedral. You can see his work is obviously much more representational than most of the work we've seen so far. This is the Miraculous Draught of Fish. This is the Last Supper. And this is Gethsemane, the agony. Now we come to a very well-known artist, Maggi Hambling, born in 1945. This is the Good Friday that she painted in 1991. It departs from traditional iconography, first of all, in the fact that the head of Christ is a different way round from usual, and there's a deliberate ambiguity about it, expressed in the pink and the blue, as to whether the Christ at that point is alive or dead. Maggi Hambling studied art at schools in East Anglia, then at Camberwell and the Slade. She's become one of the best known of modern British painters, first of all for her portraits in an expressionist style of people like Max Wall and George Melly, then for her controversial public sculpture, including the memorial to Benjamin Britten on the beach at Aldborough of giant scallop shells. More recently, she's turned to landscape and seascape in her native Suffolk. But every Good Friday, she spends first of all reading the Gospels and then contemplating and painting the crucifixion. She began this discipline in 1986, partly as a tribute to her mother, who was then very frail. Brought up to go to church every Sunday, she says, consequently, it's very difficult for me to think of anything else on Good Friday but the crucifixion, the mystery, the sacrifice, the simultaneous life and death, and vice versa. She now describes herself as an optimistic doubter. And this is the Good Friday of 2002, which I think brings out well the loneliness of the figure of Christ there. And this is her Good Friday of 2007, high up and lifted up for contemplation. You'll see just from those three examples that her studies of the crucifixion are all very different, but deeply felt and fresh, some reflecting a recent visit to the continent are more traditional than others. She says that Good Friday brings out of herself some different image of Christ, which she cannot predict in advance. It's by Helen Mayer, born in 1929, an angel. And there's another angel head. Helen trained at Camberwell and at Edinburgh College of Art. She works in clay and paints, as we see, but mainly in wood. And there's the head of the angel again from another angle. As Christ and John, the beloved disciple, and a close-up of it. This comes from John 13:23, when, on the announcement that he would be betrayed, the Gospel records one of them, the disciple he loved, was reclining close beside Jesus. Simon Peter signalled him to find out which one he meant. That disciple leaned back close to Jesus and asked, "Who is it?" But Helen is also a painter. This is her Gethsemane. In 1981, she did a set of Stations of the Cross for All Saints Fulham, and these were subsequently the subject of a television film that I did with her about them. This is The Fall. And this is the Crucifixion. Helen said that when painting this, the words of Simeon to Mary kept coming to mind from Luke 2:35, "A sword shall pierce through thine own soul also." And her brother was killed in France with the Highland regiment in 1944 when he was 22 and she was 14. And the sense of loss has remained with her and surfaced strongly when she was painting this scene. And this is the Pieta. Now, a very, very sharp contrast. Peter Howson, born in 1958, this is The Tempest. Howson was born in London but moved to Scotland at the age of 4. He began as an infantry soldier in the Scottish Fusiliers, but left to study at Glasgow College of Art. He's concentrated on tough working-class figures and those on the edge of society. As well as being in major galleries, his work has been collected by various celebrities. In 1993, he was an official war artist in Bosnia. After a long battle against abuse and addiction, as well as being diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, he converted to Christianity in the year 2000. His faith now being reflected in some of his paintings. They reflect both violence, as in this Jesus falls for a second time, and compassion, as we see in Jesus Meets Mary. Judas, painted in 2002, shows him entering into the mind of the betrayer. Ecce Homo, Behold the Man, has something disturbing about it. And Legion, referring to the man in the Gospels who had the devils expelled from him, reflects also perhaps something of his own mental fragility and torment. This is Nicholas Meinheer, born in 1958, Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. Meinheer was born and brought up in a little village 10 miles from Oxford, Horton-on-Otmoor. That's where he still lives. His father was a draftsman and both parents were artistic. He's always drawn. He studied design at Hornsey College of Art and then went into advertising. Newly married with a very well-paid job, he was copying an old master one day when he knew he simply had to throw everything up and become a painter. With a young family to support, he's known great difficulty financially at times, but has kept going with a very strong sense of Christian vocation to be an artist. He's always focused on biblical themes and Christian iconography and has not been drawn yet to other subjects. Some of the first paintings that he made had made an impact on him when he was younger with the German Expressionists, and we can see that his work has a strong expressionist element, a powerful emotional charge realized in the way the scene is depicted. Like so many of the artists that have been considered in this series of lectures, he also highly admires William Blake and Samuel Palmer. This is his appearance to Thomas. Meiner's style, as we've seen, is highly distinctive. A picture or a carving by him is instantly recognizable. Like his vocation to become a painter in the first place, it happened in an instant. He says he'd spent more than 2 months painting Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane in the naturalistic style that was his at the time, when he suddenly realized that the picture was really, really bad. Very depressed, he cut out a small piece of cardboard, looked at the scene again, and simply drew on that piece of cardboard the elements in it that seemed essential to what he wanted to express. So, as we can see here, and we've seen in the previous painting, his approach is now to focus on the essential figurative elements and cut out all extraneous detail, which is one of the reasons why in the first place he was drawn to small paintings, because there was less temptation to put in surplus detail. The result of this, of course, is that a particular gesture can be highly exaggerated, and some parts of the body, an arm, for example, if they're not part of the essential element, are simply not painted in at all. And the only way in which his style has changed over the years, he thinks, is that the exaggeration has got less and the emphasis has become more subtle. This is his Last Supper. This is his Crucifixion. And this is the women at the empty tomb. These paintings, the ones I've just shown, are from his Sarum series on the Passion, shown first in Salisbury Cathedral, which he will not sell, but which are shown from time to time in a church or cathedral. And he sees his work as very much being in the iconic tradition, in other words, not simply as works of art, but there to help people with their faith. But it is also his intention that they should work first, not only at an artistic level, but in relating to the universal human experience with which people can identify, and only then for people to see any particular biblical resonances. For example, in Flight to Egypt, and Rest on the Flight to Egypt, he sees these paintings as, first of all, relating to the many people in the world today who've had to flee from their homes as refugees. These are very well-known scenes from Western art. The first one I showed derived from this one, in fact, derived from a story in Apocryphal Gospel. But he hopes that even people totally unfamiliar with the meaning of the scene from the point of view of Christian faith will be able to enter into its experience. This is his Elijah being fed by an angel. And you can see that this, which is a traditional scene for icons does, in Nicholas Meyer's hands, also have a deliberately iconic quality. In recent years, he's taken to carving, for which he's received a number of commissions, and at present he's engaged in bas-reliefs for a font he's designed for a new church in Qatar. He took up carving by accident. He was on holiday with his wife in France and told her he wouldn't do any painting at all so that he could enjoy looking at things with her. But he picked up a piece of wood and started whittling at it with a penknife. When he got home, he happened to show what he'd produced to a gallery owner who immediately wanted to sell it for him. And because of this experience, he sought out Frederick Lawson, that was the first artist I've shown this afternoon, and learnt the skills necessary for carving. Now, in this piece, we see his characteristic style, clearly related to his paintings, and here we see it even more with his Christ and Peter. Peter is looking up at Christ and making his confession, "Thou art Christ." But his arm is also saying, "Save me," for when he tried to walk on water, he felt himself drowning. To the left of Christ, to the right as you look, is a rock on which are the followers of Christ. The Christ who said to Peter, "You are a rock on which I will build my church." And below that is the cock who signals Peter's betrayal. So the whole story of the relationship of Christ and Peter are presented through a few selective details. And in recent years, Nicholas has also worked in glass, and this is a series of windows for Abingdon School Chapel. Now, the strength of Meyer's work is obvious, isn't it? It's accessible, fresh, and a striking reworking of familiar Christian images. And his early training in design and work in advertising has clearly lent its influence here. I think the only question is whether the dark and disordered side of human life, so prevalent in our time and reflected in so much other art, at least in the 20th century, is fully taken into account. That's the Trinity. And this is the harvest. Nicholas Meyer has written about this. The harvest picture is an example of the growing influence of the countryside in my paintings. I see, he says, that this as a deposition. The basket of apples represents Christ as the fruit of the tree. The basket is being received by a figure, possibly his mother, whilst the figure lower right reaches to pick up a fallen apple. She represents Eve. These three trees are the crosses, and the one to the left of the picture has a few fruit on it, the good thief. The two ploughed fields represent the tearing of the temple curtain. So clearly Nicholas Meyer has no qualms at all about steeping his painting in quite deliberate Christian imagery and picking out quite specific Christian themes. Then another very prolific artist at the moment, Mark Cazalet, born in 1944. That's his raising of Lazarus. That's his Angels in Peckham. He was educated at Stowe and then Falmouth College of Art, and his work has been shown in a number of exhibitions. He's capable of painting in a range of different styles, and indeed it is possible to see the influence of a variety of different artists in the work he's done. First one I've shown was clearly Byzantine and iconic. This one is, it seems to me, clearly influenced by Stanley Spencer, and this one called Mr. and Mrs. Hosea, clearly influenced by Rouault, if you remember the work of Rouault from the very first lecture in this series. This is called Everyday Epiphany 3. In contrast to Nicholas Meyer here, Mark Cazalet does not confine himself to biblical subjects and does not like the description Christian artist, though he is a Christian. For he'd want to say that even when painting other subjects, there can be a religious response. And he also likes to involve other people, schools and communities, in producing a work of art together. He is, I think, at his strongest and most original in his cityscapes, as in this Epiphany, and in this study of gas holders, Kensal Rise gas holders, sunrise, midday, and evening. And he's made these cityscapes the setting for his Stations of the Cross, West London Stations of the Cross, of which this is one. Then this is Veronica's veil, though it's very difficult to see the veil. I think it's over on the right there, but you can hardly see it. And this is Jesus condemned. Not surprisingly, but very effectively, he's sought to set the story of Jesus in the city, setting his Stations to the Cross there. And whilst believing that the Bible expresses timeless truths, he thinks that they come alive for us by giving them a contemporary setting. This is Jesus' childhood of Nazareth. And this is one of his 3 Johannine miracles, the blind man. He thinks that Christianity is essentially a hidden and oblique exercise, and this should be reflected in art by Christian artists. Artists, he thinks, are prophets and seers on the edge of things, suggesting a different way of seeing and of understanding life. This is his Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's his Tree of Life, which you'll see in Chelmsford Cathedral. That's the Cross of the Nations at Doha, Qatar. That's the altar frontal at Holy Trinity Bosom. And that's Notting Hill Carnival, a detail from it, painted for St Clement's, Notting Hill. As you can see, Cazalet works in a range of materials, textiles, glass and mosaic, as well as paintings. He's received a good number of commissions for churches in which these different media have been used in a way which both responds to what is desired by the commissioner and the liturgical setting. This is his Judas. And this is his Christ's entry into Jerusalem. Although fully conscious that there's no symbolic order that unites society and that the old images have usually lost their freshness, he's optimistic that there are fresh ways of treating these themes that can break through even today to people's feelings. But as you have seen, or we've seen, I think he has been very influenced by a number of other people, and I wonder whether these last 2 I've shown, there's been the influence of Anna Maria Pachko. Charles Lutyens, born in 1933. This is his Fire Angel mosaic, painted in 1968. Charles studied at Chelsea, Slade, St Martin's and Central Schools of Art in London, later in Paris. Though mainly a painter, he's worked in a range of media and has exhibited widely. From 1963 to 68, he worked on a commission to produce a mosaic mural of angels of the heavenly host, on the 4 long panels high above and surrounding the congregation and altar of St Paul's Bow in London, with light flooding down from the large lantern on top. At 800 square feet, it's almost certainly the largest contemporary mural in the British Isles. Lutyens was commissioned by the architects of the church because they thought his work constantly revealed a feeling for states of mind or spirit. They thought that as we don't know what angels look like, it was important that the work be not too representational, and as they put it, this work had achieved just the right balance between the figurative and the abstract, between severity and empathy, between assertiveness and recession. Mainly a portrait and landscape painter, Lutyens has turned to Christian themes from time to time, as in this recently exhibited and sold The Mocking, 1968. What I found interesting about this when I saw it is the way the tormentors seem to be hiding behind a great sheet as though they don't want to see what they're doing. The highlight of a recent exhibition, however, was a work which has also just been completed and was on view there for the first time. This is a much larger-than-life, 15-foot Outrage Christ, made of carved and recycled timber shaped in the form of slats. The first Christians liked to show Christ victorious on the cross. The medieval period focused on his suffering for the sins of the world. The 20th century, too, focused almost exclusively on the suffering of Christ, but more often than not as a paradigm of the suffering of a terrible century with its innumerable victims. The Outrage Christ is, so far as I know, a fresh addition to Christian iconography. It's a moving and impressive work. Instead of showing Christ being battered or anguished, it depicts him with mouth open, slightly to one side, with knees pushing forward from the cross in rage. But here is rage, indeed fury, not just what is being inflicted on him, but at what we humans do to one another. And then the last work I'm going to consider is Roger Wagner, born in 1957. This is his Ash Wednesday, painted in 1982. Roger read English at Oxford, where he obtained a first, then studied art at the Royal Academy. His work is totally unlike most other modern artists working on Christian themes, being on the one hand painstakingly old-fashioned in its sheer artistic skill. He can spend more than a year on a single painting, and surrealistically modern in its mythopoetic powers. And it's interesting that of modern painters, the biggest influence has been de Chirico, even though he doesn't respond to surrealism as such. He says that he saw an exhibition of his in Venice when he was still young at school, and it affected him very deeply. The colour, the energy, and empty space gave him a sense of strangeness that made him see poetry in painting. And whilst he admires Picasso's talent and virtuosity, the only painting of his to which he responds is Guernico, which he does regard as a great work. As far as modern painters depicting themes are concerned, he tends to admire individual works rather than a whole oeuvre. For example, he likes Graham Sutherland's early crucifixions rather than his work in Coventry Cathedral. Now, in addition to his painting, Wagner is both a poet and someone who's learnt Hebrew, and a major feature of his output is his own fresh translation of the Psalms, published in limited editions with his own woodcuts. Now, although the emphasis of his work is sometimes on the visual and sometimes on the literary, in fact, they seem to interact all the times. Take, for example, this Ash Wednesday, which both has a surrealistic feel and immediately brings to mind the opening lines of the poem of that name by T.S. Eliot. Lady, 3 white leopards sat under a juniper tree in the cool of the day, having fed to satiety. On my legs, my heart, my liver, and that which had been contained in the hollow round of my skull. And God said, shall these bones live? Shall these bones live? Now we can see from this that Roger, not surprisingly, has a highly visual literary imagination. And it's not surprising that he also reads and therefore paints the biblical stories in a highly visual way, which is at once old-fashioned and surreal, for they're always set in a contemporary setting and have a contemporary meaning, as we see in Walking on Water in 1995. Now, Roger is also an accomplished poet, and sometimes he's written a poem to go with a painting. I'll just read the poem that he's written to go with this one. To step out of ourselves onto that sea, forsaking every safety that we know, becoming for one moment wholly free, that in that moment endless trust may grow, to step into that love which calls us out from all evasions of one central choice, besieged by winds of fear and waves of doubt, yet summoned by that everlasting voice, to walk on water in astonished joy towards those outstretched arms which draw us near, then caught by winds which threaten to destroy, we sink into the water of our fear. Yet underneath all fears and false alarms, our sinking held by everlasting arms. This is Walking on Water 2. When it's pointed out that his method of biblical painting scenes against a temporary background is what all the great artists in the past have done, he said that he's never been drawn to be an archaeological painter, trying to imagine the past, nor was it simply a question of simply recreating the scene. Rather, it was a question of seeing the contemporary burgeoning with a biblical element. And he gives Rembrandt as an example, for you don't know if the scene in Rembrandt is either biblical or contemporary. And it is this which gives depth and meaning to the painting. And he mentions the artist Tobias Jones, who when he paints a wall leaves the impression that there's something mysterious and important behind it. Here, as you can see, we have a clear contemporary setting for that biblical miracle. He's a wonderful painter of oak trees, is Roger. I'm afraid this colour's come out rather strange, not at all like the actual colours of the painting. I don't know why it's quite about that. He's also written a wonderful poem on that, which I haven't got time to read, but you'll find it in the notes. This is called There Is a River. He's done a series on Job, and also, as mentioned, he's produced a series of books on the Psalms, from which this comes. And the strong biblical images, occasionally with the Renaissance feel, as here, entered his being via Italian Renaissance paintings that hung on the wall of his parents' home, part of the collection of his uncle Henry Wagner, who donated many of them to the National Gallery. And this is an illustration for his translation of Psalm 46, which has the line in it, "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells." Perhaps the first major painting of Wagner to catch the eye was "The Harvest is the End of the World and the Reapers are Angels," painted in 1989, Matthew 13:39. And there is a wonderful comment in it, in a poem which he wrote on it, which, again, I don't think we've got time to read, so I will just let you look at the painting and look at the close-up of it. As we might expect, Roger has been acutely aware of the challenge presented by modern art to artists who want to explore Christian themes, and he himself has written thoughtfully about this challenge. But he didn't deliberately set out to meet that challenge in the way that he has. Rather, he refers to Kenneth Clark, saying that when he read something he'd written earlier, he recognized his own voice. And he says that his own style and subject matter emerged out of himself in that kind of way. And he first recognized his own voice in this painting of his angels reaping, having been very dissatisfied with the first attempt, as well as his first attempt at the menorah, which I'll be showing in a moment, where, first of all, he could see what he's trying to do but hadn't achieved it. Later on, both with this angels and the menorah, he felt he could see what he was trying to do, and he had succeeded in doing it. Asked about its contrariness with the current zeitgeist, he says that he's never taken the slightest notice of the zeitgeist. And in a telling phrase, he says he likes paintings which convey a sense of a country where he's not quite sure where he is. This is the menorah I mentioned. There's a very powerful commentary on this by Roger himself, which I have quoted in the notes, and I'm not going to read it out loud. This has been bought by the Ashmolean, but at the moment is hanging in St. Giles Church in Oxford, if you want to see it. Obviously, it's called the menorah because of the 7 candles, of Jewish candles, which are also Didcot Power Station, which dominate the Oxfordshire landscape for about 20 miles round. But there are also, obviously, the ovens of Auschwitz, and those are Jewish figures there grieving. And you've got the 3 figures of the thieves and Christ on the cross. What is particularly striking about this painting is the light on the clay loam, which it seems to be the light of judgment. This is his road to Emmaus. And of late, there seems to be an emphasis in his paintings on the fact that Christianity is essentially a hidden affair. That's the road to Emmaus, but where's the supper? Well, it seems to me, if we're going to locate a supper in that painting, it would just be there. This is Abraham and the Angels, painted in 1995. The story in Genesis of Abraham offering hospitality to 3 strangers and discovering that they were angels was taken by the early church as a sign. What's happening here? Sorry about that. As a sign of the Trinity, and resulted, for example, in the wonderful icon on this theme by Andrei Rublev in the 14th century. But the Abraham story is followed by the destruction of the cities of the plain. So here, Wagner has set the meal against the background of Sizewell nuclear plant. And asked about the way he showed the biblical image as almost hidden, he points out that this is simply the way that it was. And he points out that Bruegel did the same, though he himself has done it independently. So that is the Abraham painted in 1995. This is, and this next one is the Abraham and the Angels painted in 2002, which is the last one I'm going to show in order to leave a minute or two for questions. After a trip to Syria some years later, a number of his paintings were given a Syrian background. And the one here features the meal in close-up, reflecting the hospitality of the Bedouin against the background of a cement factory, indicating the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So you can see, just to go back to the other one, what seems to be an emerging theme in him is this essential hiddenness of the sacred in a secular world. We saw something of that in some of the earlier people we were depicting. Mark Cazalet also seems to be moving in that direction. But you can see what dominates that picture is that Sizewell, but the angels are there under the trees. There's the hospitality of angel. And here we have a close-up of it. But again, you cannot ignore the cement factory, if you like, the destruction, the judgment of the world within which we are able to offer hospitality and, in doing so, to receive angels unaware. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for this lecture, but we've got a few minutes for questions, I'm glad to say. So we could have the lights, please. That would be lovely.
For more information, please visit www.gresham.ac.uk.